Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Akers, and I'm the director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations here at Cal State San Bernardino. We serve children, parents, and families in the inland region through research, education, and applied services. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Supporting Children's Healthy Gender Development. And so with that, it is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Rachel Cook. Rachel is a research fellow with the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations here at CSUSB. She grew up in Tennessee and Georgia before completing her PhD in Family and Human Development at Arizona State University. Her primary research interests include the development of children's gender identity and gender-related stereotypes and prejudice. Specifically, she studies how and why children develop prejudice towards others' gender expression in an effort to improve peer relationships and social environments for gender non-conforming youth. We're very fortunate to have Rachel with us here today to share her expertise. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Rachel Cook.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and thank you everyone for coming today. I'm excited to be able to talk with you all about this interesting topic. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to talk with everybody today about how to support children's healthy gender development. So we're all interested at the ICDFR in supporting healthy development of children and youth and families. And sometimes something that can get overlooked in that is their gender and how that plays a role in their healthy development. And so today I just kind of want to talk about some things about what gender means to children and how we can support their healthy development as it relates to their gender. So to just kind of start out, why are we interested in talking about gender? Why is that an important topic? So for one thing, a lot of people think that maybe gender is kind of an obvious thing that's out there. It's very clear cut. There's boys and there's girls, and we know what boys are like and what girls are like. And so there's no reason to really talk about it or explore it any further than that. But actually it can be a little more complicated than that. There are variations in what boys like to do and what girls like to do. Not all girls like pink and not all boys like blue. And so it can be a little bit more complicated when we think about what gender really means for children and how it shapes our relationships and how it can kind of play a role in all kinds of areas of our lives. And so when we think about it, really gender is kind of everywhere. So when we think about, one of the first things that we do when we learn that there's going to be a new child into the world, people are often doing gender reveal parties now. Everything is very pink and blue. We decorate our nurseries and get toys and clothes and everything that are very pink and blue. And everything is kind of set up in a way to promote the development of this perfect baby girl and everything that means, or this perfect baby boy and everything that means. And so there's lots of things from the very beginning where there's messages about what gender is supposed to be for boys and girls. And that kind of continues throughout our lives. And so there's messages about gender everywhere and what it is. And because it can be so complicated, it's really important for us to talk about it with our kids and help them try to understand and work through what all of these messages mean, what the importance of pink is and what the importance of blue is, and try to make sure that they're understanding it properly. And so they kind of need our support in thinking about what gender really is and how it can be a positive thing or a negative thing, just to really understand what it means for their development. So just kind of an overview for today's talk. I'm just going to kind of talk about what gender is and what it means to children, how they think about what gender means, how that changes over time. So what gender means to a 2-year-old is different from what it means to a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and so on. And so I'll talk about kind of some patterns that we see in what gender means. Then I'll also talk about what happens when children don't fit into the gender norms. So what that means is, if they like things or if they're interested in things that don't really go along with what is kind of typical for a boy or a girl to be into, what that kind of means for their development and how I can support that. And so then lastly, we'll talk about some strategies for how we can support children's healthy gender development. So making sure that they're in a positive, healthy, welcoming, warm environment. So to start out with, we'll just kind of get on the same page with what I mean when I'm talking about gender. So I've said it several times already in the presentation, but to just kind of make sure that we all know what I mean when I say that. So for children, when we think about gender, it really is just about a social category. It's a social identity. So it's something that we call ourselves. It is something that puts us in a group with other people. So like we can think about boys as a group or girls as a group. It's something that shows that there are things that we like or things that we wear or things that go along with this social identity. And so if I call myself a girl or a woman, that is my gender. Or if someone is a boy or a man, that's their gender. And so this is a different thing than biological sex. So that's something that we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But so when we think about like chromosomes and DNA, or if we think about hormones, testosterone and estrogen, all of that stuff is more biological and about our bodies, and not really, it's a different thing than when we're thinking about an identity and who someone is and how they feel. So those are different things, sex and gender. And so today we're just going to be talking about gender. So how kids feel and who they feel like they are. So what that means to a child, instead of, they're not really thinking about what sex means or what, whole gender groups mean. What they're really thinking about for younger children, especially, it's just kind of a label or a category or something that we can call ourselves or other people. So I can label myself as a girl, or I can label myself as a boy. It might have to do with the clothes that I like to wear. If I like pink or dresses, or if I like pants and blue, or the toys that I like to play with. There's gender associated with that. The activities I like to do. That's kind of what gender means to younger children. It's kind of very surface level, stereotype kind of thinking. And then for older children, when they're thinking about things in a little bit more of a complex way, that's when we start to see more things about it being like a social group. We can talk more about what that means in just a minute. So they think about what gender means to themselves and for other people. So they learn, they get messages from everybody. So like we mentioned, there's parents are creating gender environments from what they put in their nursery and like the clothes they give them to wear and the toys they let them play with. But we also see it, in movies and TV, and people in the grocery store will come up and talk about, oh, that's a healthy little strong baby boy or whatever. Like there's all kinds of gender things in the way that we interact with people, even strangers. And so there's gendered messages kind of everywhere. And so kids are learning at all different stages of development. So whether they're a young child or an older child, they're hearing things about gender everywhere. And so they're learning that it's a really important category. So now I'll go a little bit more specific into kind of these patterns for younger children. And we'll talk about how it grows as they grow older. So for toddlers, gender and toddlers. Because of this environment that we often put them in, where it's a pink or blue nursery, or we dress them in certain types of clothes, or we give them certain toys to play with, they start to learn that girl and boy is a really important label to give someone. There are behaviors that are associated with this label. There are appearances that are associated with this label. So if you say someone is a girl, that means all kinds of different things. Like it means that they're supposed to be nice and smiley and pretty and wear cute, like pretty frilly dresses and all kinds of things. And if they're a boy, they're supposed to be tough and strong and active and there's all kinds of things we associate with them. And so they learn that this is an important label that they can give to themselves. So they start being able to identify themselves and call themselves a girl or a boy around 2 years old. So some of these patterns are going to be, a little bit different. Like sometimes it'll happen earlier for some kids and sometimes it'll happen later for some kids. These are just kind of patterns and trends that we see in the research. So around 2 years old is when children can start to identify themselves and call themselves by the label that they want to be called, like they want to be. They can also, around this age, around 2 years old, start having their own preferences for the clothes that they want to pick out or the toys that they want to play with. And sometimes this goes along with what their gender is, and sometimes it doesn't. Then you can start to see kind of these patterns for the kinds of toys or clothes that they go for and the ones that they like a little bit better. And so what we're seeing in the toys and the clothes and the messages and everything, what the gendered messages are that they're receiving from their parents, but also, like I said, in TV and movies and from other adults around them, they're just learning that gender is a really important category. So it carries all of this meaning. So they're learning already that that's an important way to see the world, that it's a very important organizing structure for how to think about things in the world. It's like there's a girl way to do things and a boy way to do things. And so that's what is going on in their brain, is they're learning that gender is a really important thing, and they're starting to associate themselves with a gender by labeling themselves around 2 years old. So then when they get a little bit older, so younger children, 3 to 5-ish, so 3, 4, 5-year-olds, start to get really rigid in thinking about what gender means. So by now they've figured out that they really need to pay attention to this gender thing. So they're learning that, it's really important to be a girl in the right way and a boy in the right way. And so around the same age is when we're really starting to get them to, follow rules and learn the right and wrong things to do. And we start, really start to do disciplines and timeouts, and we kind of teach them about different rules that they need to follow. And they're really concerned about making sure that they're following the right rules in the right way. And so these things kind of get combined, where they learn that gender is an important thing and that there's rules that go along with gender, and rules in general. They're really wanting to follow it. So they are really thinking about the importance of gender rules. So there is a right way to be a boy and a right way to be a girl. And that's something that they're thinking about and feeling at this time. So it's kind of they're learning about, they're taking in all of this information, like I said, from parents and TV and everything. And this is where they're trying to really figure out what it means to be a boy or a girl in the right way. And they're really wanting to follow those rules and fit in. So they really want to do gender the right way. And so around this age where it's 3, 4, 5 years old, we start to see something. So in girls, we call it the pink frilly dress syndrome. And so you might have noticed, if you've seen little girls in your lives, this is kind of an age where they start to wear a lot of pink frilly dresses. And it's all about, pink and sparkles and unicorns and rainbows and everything that, princess outfits. They want to stay in their princess outfits for days at a time or whatever. And a similar thing happens to boys as well. We just don't have a name for it, but it'll be about kind of avoiding all of those things that have to do with girliness. And so they want to avoid everything that has to do with pink or dresses or dolls and whatever. They want to do superhero things or macho tough things. And so they have a very intense, rigid way of thinking about gender as well. So they want to stay in their box of making sure that they're being a boy and being a girl in the right way. So this might be an age where things are really intense. And so when we think about what this looks like in context, so when children are when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, they can start going into preschool and kindergarten. And so they're starting to be around other children their age. And so that can lead to an important shift in how kids are thinking about their gender. So sometimes their children's play groups end up getting segregated by gender. So sometimes this is because of kids' own preferences. So boys will want to play with boys and girls will want to play with girls. Sometimes it's because the caretaker or the teacher puts them in separate groups where boys are separate from girls over here. And so girls are playing house and playing with dolls and boys are playing trucks and running around and roughhousing. And so this is where we really start to see that children separate themselves by gender. And that is something that we see carry on throughout the rest of our lives. So it starts this very early. And so the implications of that, so when children are, thinking about following the gender rules and being a boy and a girl in the right way, they want to make sure that they're following the rules, but they're also wanting to make sure that others are following the right gender rules. So even at 3 and 4 years old, we start to see, in these preschool settings, for example, if they're seeing a boy that wants to play with a doll, they'll go and tell them right away, dolls are for girls, you can't do that. Or a girl that wants to play with a truck, you can't play with that, you're a girl. They're trying to teach other people that they're doing gender things in the wrong way, because it's a really important rule and we need to follow it. And so this is something that is, they're getting their gendered messages from their peers. So they're hearing these things from the other kids that are around them. They're hearing it from their caretakers or their teachers. They're hearing it from their parents and movies. It's getting even more reinforced that gender is this very important social category that the world is kind of divided around, and that there's a right and wrong way to do it. So this is kind of what 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are thinking about being about gender. So then, as children get a little older, so 6, 7, 8 years old, children become much more flexible. So right before this, 3, 4, 5, they're really rigid in thinking about their gender. So you have to stay in a box and be perfectly within that box. When they're 6, 7, 8, they start to become much more flexible. So they're okay with stepping outside of the box. So they are, so when they're thinking about their own gender, so they're getting a little bit more freedom around this age to think about their own kind of preferences, and they're able to choose their own activities or hobbies or people they want to hang out with or games they want to play. So they have more opportunity to develop their own interests, and they're okay with stepping out of those gender boxes a little more. So girls feel less like they need to wear the pink frilly dresses all the time, and they're more willing to wear pants or play soccer or do something active or whatever. Boys are a little bit less rigid during this time. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we start to see a little bit more variation in how much girls are thinking about being girly and boys are thinking about being boyish. So there's a little bit more flexibility around this time. But it also carries over into how children of this age, 6, 7, 8, start to think about other people's gender. So, at this age, they can start thinking about things in a little more of a complex way. So they are realizing that things aren't always very black and white and clear cut. They're recognizing that things are sometimes more complicated and sometimes there's shades of gray. So this helps them apply that to gender as well. So they start to realize oh, okay, sometimes boys like pink and sometimes girls like sports and different things like that. They don't necessarily like it yet. So that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But they're starting to at least recognize that gender isn't always so clear cut and people don't always fall into those same patterns. And they start thinking about gender in a little bit more of a complex and sophisticated way. So for what gender means to children at this age, so 8-ish years old, they're still getting gendered messages from peers and parents and the media about what gender means, but they are starting to realize that it's more complicated than just pink and blue. So the complicated bit is that sometimes the stereotypes and all of the messages that we've received about what girls do and what boys do and whatever, sometimes they don't match the reality of what is out there and what people are actually feeling and doing and who they are. So sometimes, for example, children might have different preferences than what one might expect for their gender. So sometimes, like we see over here on the left, this boy would really like to play with dolls. Or sometimes, like we see on the right, this girl is really happy playing with trucks. So sometimes their preferences and their hobbies, the activities, their clothes don't match the expectations for their gender. Sometimes children might have a different identity that we might expect. So someone that we thought, so the identity, remember, is like this category, this label that we give ourselves. That's kind of what we feel on the inside. And so that might be a different thing than we would expect from what someone looks like or what their sex is that we assign them. So we'll talk about that actually on this next slide. So here is a diagram, a picture that we sometimes use to talk to kids about gender. And so this is like a gingerbread man. This is a genderbread person. So it's just a little cartoon that talks about different aspects of someone's gender. So it just shows that there are different pieces to what we mean when we talk about gender and sex, because it can all be complicated. We can think about, for example, I've mentioned that their sex is different from their identity, their gender identity. So down here at the bottom, we can see sex. They're looking at genitalia right now. That's something that people often associate with sex. So that's kind of a body-related, biology-related thing that is different from their identity. So up on the top where you see their brain, and it's got the pink and yellow and blue. So that's their identity, what they're telling themselves and what they're thinking and what they're feeling about their gender. And that's a separate thing from the sex part. The expression over here that's kind of on the side that's wiggly, it kind of shows that it's their whole person. So when we talk about gender expression, those are all of the other like outward things. So the clothes that they like to wear, the activities they like to do, the way that they want to show themselves and show their gender to the world, that is also a separate thing from identity. So sometimes all of these things align in the way that we might expect. So if someone's sex, someone's genitalia would tell us that they are a girl, and their identity, their brain part of the picture, tells them that they are a girl, and then their gender expression, so they like to wear pink and dresses and everything, those things all kind of go together in the way that you would expect. Sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes, like their gender, their gender identity and their sex would align, so that person that we would expect to be a girl does actually feel like a girl, but her gender expression, like the things that she wants to wear and do, so she's actually kind of a tomboy. So she wants to play with trucks and play sports and things like that. So that's where your gender and sex are aligned, but your expression is not, it doesn't match what you would expect. But sometimes that's like a different thing than when someone's sex and gender identity don't align. So this is a separate thing. So you are kind of hearing about this a lot more in popular media and things, the issue of being transgender. And so that just means that the sex part and the identity part don't align in the way that we might expect. So if someone's genitalia is suggesting to us that they're a girl, but their identity, the brain part, and what they feel like and what they're thinking about, they are a boy, that means that they are transgender. And so then that's a separate thing. So just because a girl wants to play with trucks doesn't mean that she is actually transgender. It just means that she's a girl that likes to play with trucks. But also sometimes it's possible, sorry, I'm sorry. This can be complex, and so it's I want to try to be careful, but I also want to make sure that I get to other things. So I'm happy to try to explain this better in the Q&A portion after. But basically, the take-home point is that gender and sex are different things, and gender identity and gender expression can be different things. So let's see. To talk about what gender looks like for these kids. So to think about the same kind of age level progression of what gender means to them and what they are thinking about gender and the things that they like to do and the ways that they label themselves. What does it look like for these kids when things don't necessarily align or go along with the stereotypes for gender? So I know that what I was talking about on the previous slide, it sounds kind of complicated, but really the message for this is mostly that the patterns are the same for these kids than they are for the children that I spent the first bit talking about. So around the same ages, so around 2 or 3 years old, they start to label themselves as girl or boy, the same kinds of categories, the same labels. They start to think about gender in the same kind of way. They start to realize that gender is an important category and they associate themselves with that. They label themselves. Around 3 to 5, they also have kind of a rigid stage where they have really gendered toy and clothes and activity preferences. And they might have a rigid gender stage too. And so then around 7 or 8 is when they can become more flexible in gender thinking. So they start to realize that things can be a little more complicated than just pink and blue and girls and boys. So all of the same patterns are there for these kids as they were for the other kids. The only difference is their context that they're in. So if we remember all of those gendered messages that the kids were hearing. So gender is this really important category. It's really important for you to follow the right gender rules. There's a right way and a wrong way to be a girl or a boy. Those same messages are getting told to these kids as well. And so for the other ones, like for the first set of kids that we were talking about, it's kind of, okay, that's fine. Like I'm a girl and I like pink and dresses, so everything's fine. If I'm a girl who doesn't like pink and dresses, then I'm being told that I'm doing it the wrong way. And so this can be messages from their parents or their peers. So it could be things that parents say like, they don't want their kids wearing a certain type of clothes. So they don't want their little boy wearing a pink shirt, or they don't want him wearing a skirt, or they don't want their girls playing in the mud, or whatever it is. There's different activities or clothes or things that we don't want them to do because of their gender, because we're kind of giving them the message that they're doing it the wrong way, or their peers are explicitly telling them, you can't do that because you're a girl. Just different messages like that about that they're doing gender the wrong way. So this can, as children get older, it can get more more severe and more hurtful as we think about kind of what the examples look like. So it can be, more name calling or like more severe bullying. They can socially exclude them, so they can leave them out and not let them join in when they're playing because they're not going to play with the boys in the right way because they won't be as active or whatever because they like to play with dolls. So different things like that can happen. And so often the messages that we get for when girls or boys don't fit into the gender boxes, a lot of times the messages that we give them are worse for boys than for girls. So when you think about a girl, like a little tomboy, like what we see in this picture, okay, she likes to wear jeans and she likes to run around and get messy and play soccer and whatever. A lot of times we think okay, that's fine. She just likes different stuff. She's allowed to do that. But a lot of times when we think about the same kinds of things for a boy, so if a boy wants to step out of the gender box and the boy wants to play with dolls or the boy wants to wear a dress or things like that, their box is a lot smaller. So they are less able and less allowed kind of to show any kind of variation. And so a lot of times the messages that they get from parents or peers for stepping out of that box are a lot more negative and a lot more harmful for boys and for girls. And so when we think about what that means, so remember there's gender messages everywhere from, pre-childbirth through, I only went to like 7 or 8 years old, and gender continues to be a thing forever, but that would take a lot more time to talk about. But this whole time, their whole lives, they're getting all of these gendered messages. And so after years of being told that they're doing it the wrong way, it can really have hurtful outcomes for these children. When we think about what this might, like what kind of effects this can have on children when they're being told that they're not following the right gender rules, we can think about that they have mental health challenges. So that's the first thing we can think of. So they might experience some bullying at school, or they might not feel accepted at home or from their families. So children, if their gender identity or their gender expression don't fit within societal norms, they often struggle with all kinds of outcomes, mental health outcomes, for example. So they'll have lower self-esteem, feel worse about themselves. They might feel more depressed. They might feel more anxious. They often have academic difficulties. So when they go to school and they're getting bullied or they're not fitting in, they don't really want to go to school. They don't really like being there. It's kind of a negative environment for them. So they have less school liking, so then they're less engaged in school. So they don't really want to focus and pay attention and be interested in classes. And so then they end up having worse grades. They want to miss school to try to avoid being in that kind of environment. So it can affect those kinds of things. And then they can have different kinds of more harmful coping strategies. So they can turn to substance abuse or consider suicide. So those things are often things that we think of for maybe older children or adolescents. But for children who don't fit into societal norms around gender, they're at a much higher, 3 to 4 times more likely to consider an attempt to suicide, even at these younger ages that I'm talking about. So it's not just for adolescents. We have to be really careful and mindful about what messages we're giving to children, even at these younger ages, because they can turn to substance abuse and suicide. Sorry, I know that's the negative part. But so if we think about all of these negative things, I'm sure that we want to all avoid that. We're interested in healthy child development. So what if we back up and those children were put into supportive environments instead? So instead of having their gendered messages that they're receiving the whole time, their whole lives, instead of being told, okay, girls do this and boys do this, and if you are not fitting into those boxes, then you're doing things the wrong way. So if we were told them instead, it's okay if boys like to wear pink and the dolls, and it's okay if girls want to do more active things or whatever. If we tell them that variation and stepping outside of those boxes are okay, and we put in those supportive environments, would that help them? The research shows yes. So if they are accepted in what they want to do and they're supported in what they want to do, even if it's outside of these gender boxes, a lot of this stuff is really complicated, but the bottom line, the solution part of it is that if we accept them and support them, they tend to do well. So when we think about what that actually means and how we do that, we'll talk about some strategies for doing that. So really, if we accept kids and we support them, then all of those negative things that we were just talking about, so the mental health challenges, academic difficulties, gone. Mental health challenges, they're doing fine because they're not being bullied or rejected by their parents or punished anymore for wanting to do different things. They're no longer considering substance abuse and suicide. It's all of those negative things are going away because they are now accepted and put in supportive environments. So let's talk about some strategies and what we can do to try to support that. So as I mentioned, a lot of this stuff gets really complicated if you really get into thinking about it. But the answer is really simple. It's something that we think about for all kinds of parenting things. Really, we just need to provide a loving and supportive environment for them. So we just show them that it's okay to be who they are and do the things they want to do. So we'll talk about specific strategies, but this is the bottom line. It's just be a loving and supportive person for them. So, for example, let's think about what this might actually look like. So let them explore different activities or clothes or toys. And this can apply to any age of your child. So this could be if they're, 3, 4, or 5 years old, they might be in that really rigid gender state where your daughter really wants to play with sparkly pink things, or boy really wants to play with superhero things. Sometimes they'll switch and the boys will want to do princess stuff and the girls will want to do trucks and superheroes. Like if you let them explore those things, they will kind of figure out like, oh, this really feels more like me, or I like this better, or I don't actually think that I like playing with trucks or whatever. Like as long as they have that opportunity to explore and try things out, then they're feeling more okay instead of being punished and not allowed to step outside of their box. If they want to, wear a dress or a skirt because it's more comfortable, or like it's a prettier pattern or whatever, or sometimes the boys will want to go and pick flowers or whatever because they're nice to look at. Things like that are important to let boys go and do. So it's important to just kind of let them try things out and explore different things instead of having such strict rules around what gender is allowed to be. So let's see. Another way that we can do it is by if children if you figure out at some point that your child is trans, for example, it's important to use their name and their pronouns that they tell you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, or I can talk about that in the Q&A, or I have resources that I'll share at the end to give a little more detail and background on what those things mean. So the name that they choose and the pronouns that they use. So she versus he. We can talk about that later, but it's important to just go along with the identity that they tell you that they have, and support them and show them that you love them, no matter who they are, or what toys they want to play with, or what they want to wear. And so if we think about another just kind of basic way, just that kind of can encompass all of this, is to just talk to your child about gender. So as we mentioned, gendered messages are everywhere. So they're already going to be thinking about it and noticing things around them. So you might as well talk about it. They're going to be thinking about it and wondering about it. So if you talk to them about it and make it a conversation, it'll help them kind of make sense out of all of the messages that are out there. So they're going to need help thinking about their own gender and what it means for them to be a boy or a girl, or something else. And they will also need help in trying to understand other people's gender. So they'll need to understand what your gender is and what that means for you, and someone walking down the street and what their gender is and what that means for them. And so trying to talk to them and make it a conversation where we can learn about different labels to call someone if they're younger, so the way that we talk about this with our children can depend on the child's age. So the way that you explain it to a younger child is going to be a little more simple than how you would talk about it with an older child, and it'll kind of depend on where they are and what they're thinking about gender. So if it's just a label, or if it's something about what they do and what they like and what they look like, versus if it's more of a social group kind of thing that older children are thinking about. So one of the examples that you can use is this gender-bread person, and I'll give that a link to that in the resources that we'll send out. You can use that picture to kind of talk about, oh, look, this is this is a way that we can think about it. These are all different things that don't necessarily go together about a person. We can talk about explicitly, like, okay, this person is a boy, but he likes to wear pink, and some boys like to wear pink, and that's okay. We want to avoid saying things like, oh, no, you just don't do that. Boys aren't allowed to do that, or you shouldn't do that. Or if you see someone, walking down the street and you're unsure about their gender, or they're doing something that is like unexpected for their gender, if your kid asks about it, you can just talk to them about it. So instead of just kind of shutting it down and not really having a conversation, turn it into a learning moment and talk about, it's okay. Sometimes boys will want to wear skirts and whatever. And so you just you talk about it with your child instead of just kind of making it a no to talk about it, or a no to explore things like that. So a lot of times trying to think about these kind of variations and letting your son take dance lessons, or your daughter take karate, or talking about gender categories and this other like complex sounding stuff, sometimes it can feel a little intimidating or uncomfortable for parents to think about. And so sometimes it's just like kind of scary to think about, or sometimes it's weird. And that's okay. Like it's normal. It's understandable to be uncomfortable about it, because there's a lot that's going on. There's like different terminology, and there's a genderbread person. Like how that wasn't a thing when I was growing up. Like, why is that? There's all kinds of reasons that we can be kind of wary of thinking about it and talking about it with our kids. Or like, that's just not how I grew up. That's not what my parents would want them to do. There's all kinds of reasons that we might feel uncomfortable with it, and that's okay. We just want to think about what those reasons are that we feel uncomfortable with it. So if we explore what those mean. So a lot of times it comes from like a concern for the child's well-being. So it's like, they know that there's going to be all of this bullying and lack of acceptance that happens. So they want to protect them from that. So if they know that their boy is going to get bullied later on, if he starts to wear dresses, then they want to protect them from that. And so they try to like shut it down. That's kind of a common response that we see, is like they want to try to protect them, or just things like that is often what happens, is they try to kind of squash out any of these things that don't really fit into the box. And so they're trying to like help protect their child. But actually what we see in research is that what happens later on is that those children still end up having those same preferences, or they have that other gender identity, or they have that other gender expression. It's just that they're not supported in it. So that boy is still going to want to wear dresses, or still want to wear pink, or that girl is still going to want to play with a toolbox, or whatever it is. Like, they're still going to have those preferences. They're just going to learn that they're not being supported, and they're going to learn that their parents might not be a safe place for them to try to explore that. So they're not really going to be accepted. So then what happens is, like, if they do go to school or preschool or whatever, and they're hanging out with other peers and they're getting bullied about that, and they're not feeling like they're fitting in, and then they also know that they're not being supported or feel safe with their parents, then that's when those kind of bad outcomes are happening for the children. So that's how they kind of end up in the worst situation. So really, if we think about if their parents are supportive, then even if their peers are mean to them or bully them, if they feel like their parents are a safe place, and they give them positive messages about their gender and what they like to do, then they're going to feel like a sense of confidence and security, and they're going to feel like they can handle some bad treatment from their peers. They're going to be more resilient and be more strong because they know that their parents are supporting them and loving them no matter who it is that they are. So the bottom line for this part is, so even if it was coming from like a place of concern for the child's well-being, really what the best thing for children's well-being is is to just support them and affirm children and who they are. So tell them positive things like, yeah, it's great if you want to, whatever kinds of activities or whatever you want to wear or whatever you want to call yourself or label yourself as. That's the best way to help children end up happy and healthy. So it'll give them more strength to go out into the world and be who they are. Even if other people are mean, they'll feel more secure about it and happier inside. So my concluding thoughts, I know I talked about a lot of stuff. And so gender can be really complicated if we really get down into the weeds of it. But supporting your child's gender doesn't have to be super complicated. Really all it is about loving them and supporting them and telling them that you love them. So anyway, that is what I have for today. And I really appreciate all of you coming. I'm sorry I went a little bit over time, but I'm really interested in hearing people's thoughts and questions. And I'll send some resources with some details later on. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Rachel, thank you so much for what was really an informative and enlightening presentation. I know we've seen in recent years, right, an increase in just sort of social awareness and social dialogue around issues of gender and gender identity. And but that doesn't mean that we're hearing or learning about it from people who, sort of understand what the issues are from science, from social psychology, from child development, et cetera. And so I can't, this is one of the more important things I think we can be talking to parents and families about right now. And so I really will get to questions, but I really do want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. I think it's been so helpful. I did want to reiterate something that Dr. Cook mentioned, which is when this video gets posted on our YouTube page, she has a list of resources, books and other things that folks might want to reference for in your own lives. And so we'll make sure that all of that is posted when the video is posted as well. And of course, you'll receive an email notifying you. Okay, so you did use extra time, but that's all right. It was good stuff. But we do have questions, so that's all right. So let's see what we can get to. There were a couple of questions that came from folks, from the sort of parental lens, kind of asking about their own awareness of what their children are going through. So I'm going to kind of group a couple together, but one sort of framed it as how do I, as a parent, know if a child is kind of struggling with gender identity at a younger age, like 3 or 4? And then the related question was, is there anything I can observe to sort of understand my children's preference or my child's preference for their gender?
Okay, so those are really great questions. And it's helpful to know that we're kind of thinking about these issues and trying to be aware of what it is that children are really feeling and wanting to express. So let's see, I'm trying to think about how we know. So really, it's another like kind of simple sounding thing. They're going to tell you. So if we think about that time around 3 or 4 years old when everything's really rigid and really heightened and they're learning those gender rules, this is actually kind of a time when a lot of children or a lot of parents start realizing that their children might be trans. So when when their person that they thought was a son starts into that age where it's like really gendered and really heightened and there's a lot of pink and frilly and whatever, or there's a lot of superhero things, they will also go through that kind of stage where everything is really rigid. And the person that they thought was their son, they actually find out they are their daughter. And they really want to wear those pink dresses. And they'll start telling you, I mean, they've already been able to label themselves. So it'll become more clear that, I'm a girl. Like, why are you not seeing this? I want to wear pink. I want to wear dresses. I want to wear flowers. They'll tell you, and so that's something that'll show up at that age. But also, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are trans. It doesn't mean that the person you thought was a son is actually a daughter. It could just be that your son wants to play with dolls and dresses. Like, it could just be a variation, and they just they're just not fitting into what you thought they would like to do. So really, it's just about making sure they have the opportunities to explore, and you're having that kind of dialogue, that conversation with them about what they are allowed to do, what they're allowed to be, and just making sure that they know that they don't have to fit into the boxes. And really, it's something you can talk about and help kind of understand it together, because they're going to need help understanding it too. So you can learn about your child together.
Oh, that's great. That's really helpful. And I mean, something I took away from what you said that I think is probably pretty critical there, if I'm understanding you correctly, is this idea that they'll tell you, right? Like that's an important piece, right? That's going to come from our children, but also that to the extent that they will do that, it's tied to that we're being supportive, right? That we're open to that conversation.
Right. Right. And so that's another reason that it's important to open this conversation about it. So even if you don't have any reason to think that your child might be questioning things, it's important to just talk about it for them interacting with other people, so they don't go and start this kind of bullying cycle to others, but also for themselves. And so making sure that they understand, like, oh, I don't have to fit into the box. So even if your son really likes the trucks and active things, that's great. But just understanding, like, oh, it's okay if sometimes I want to play with a doll. That's cool. And so just kind of opening it up and talking about it, acknowledging that it's a thing is important.
Great. No, that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. Another question that came up in a couple of different ways, and I'm not even sure that there's a clean way to answer this question. So I apologize in advance if I'm giving you kind of like there's no answer to that question. But several folks sort of were kind of asking around, to what extent, if a child is having gender identity questions at an earlier age, sort of like what's the likelihood, or what are the percentages that child is going to, as they grow up, sort of move away from those, or are those going, more likely to become issues where, as they go into adolescence, they focus on transitioning or sort of other challenges associated with those gender identity questions?
So that's a really good question. I think this kind of can tie into some concerns or some thoughts or questions around, is this just a phase? Or is this something that is really an identity question? Or is this just something that they like for now? Or is this something that they will just like forever? So as you mentioned, there's not really a clean answer, and it's going to be different for everyone. But so a lot of times their interests, so like the colors that we like, or the toys, or the kinds of activities that we like, those tend to stay pretty stable across time. So if you notice what kinds of things your kid is liking to do around 3, it might be the same kind of things they like to do around 6 or around 9, or and into adolescence and older. It's, like I always wanted to play with blocks and trucks and whatever, and I never liked doll houses or whatever, even if my parents wanted me to do that kind of stuff. And so that kind of can stay pretty stable. But those things are the expression part of gender. So it doesn't necessarily connect with my gender identity. So, for example, I am a cisgender woman, so that just means that I'm not transgender. So my the sex and gender identity part align for me. So even though I like boy-typed things, like the trucks and blocks and whatever, I still feel like a girl. So that's still the label that I give myself. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that I needed to transition later in life. It just meant that those were my preferences, and they stayed stable. It could just be a phase. So as I mentioned, children are thinking about gender in a very rigid way from 3, 4, and 5 years old. And then they start to get more flexible and start to understand that there is more variation than they really understood early on when they're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. So that really strict gender phase could be that. It could be a phase where they're just really strict about thinking about what the gender rules are, and then they start to get oh, it's okay. I don't have to transition my gender. I don't have to be a boy to playing with blocks and trucks and things. But really around that, by that age, 8 or 9 years old, if it really is an identity issue, then there will be some other signs and more conversations, more things that they'll be saying about their gender, and they're questioning their identity and who they are, than just seeing that your daughter is playing with blocks and blocks. It'll be more of an issue. They'll kind of, like I mentioned, like they'll just tell you that there's more going on than that. So sorry, there's not really a clear answer.
Right. No.
So
right. No,
sometimes it is a phase and sometimes it's not. So
right.
Just learn about it together and talk about it.
Right. Excellent. I just want to mention, we still have a lot of, I think, what are really interesting questions. I want to ask Dr. Cook, do you have a few extra minutes that we can stay kind of ask
absolutely.
one? And okay, excellent.
Yeah, I'm sorry I took too much time, but there's just so much that we could talk about. And so,
sure.
I'm happy to take more questions.
Appreciate that. Okay. And for folks who in our audience, we'll just take a few more. Hopefully you can stay along with us as we go. The next question came, and it actually kind of aligns, I think, with what you were just talking about a bit. But the person is asking about, can you talk a little bit about perhaps when the onset of sort of the gender identity questions emerge at puberty, rather than, in childhood or, in earlier years?
So the question is like, what happens if, they're fine during childhood and then it becomes more of a problem, like a thing that they need to talk about and they're more comfortable with around puberty?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really great question. And I'm sorry we didn't get into the adolescence part. It can get a lot more complicated because of issues like this. So the way that I'll talk about it is for children and adolescents who realize that they might be trans. So their body and their biology don't match with what they feel like and what they're thinking, and who they are. So like as children, like for children, like 0 to 10 or whatever, our bodies are kind of the same. Like there's differences, but like girls and boys don't have like super obvious girl and boy parts and feeling, it's not really very differentiated between boys and girls up until you hit puberty. And that's when our girl bodies really start becoming women bodies and male bodies start becoming man bodies. And so that's when those issues start becoming more obvious. So like your voice might start changing, you might start developing breasts. There's more things going on with your body that have to do with gender. And those things might be uncomfortable for people. So that's a common thing. It doesn't happen for everyone. Some trans people are completely fine with their bodies. Sometimes it's not. So that's something that we call gender dysphoria. So dysphoria is just like you're not happy with it. So it just means that you're not feeling comfortable within your own body. And that's something that would start showing up around puberty when your body is starting to change. And so you're thinking about it a lot, you're noticing it a lot. That's going to just be a time where that stuff is heightened. And that might be a time when it shows up like, oh, I really need to start thinking about this gender issue. Like I was okay up until now, like just doing things that didn't align with what I thought my gender was, but really I don't like this body that I'm in. And so maybe we need to explore something about that. And so that's another thing. So if you start thinking about what to do about that, so like there's hormone things you can do, there's different like external things that you can do to kind of make people feel more comfortable with their bodies. And that's going to take collaboration between that child and their parents to be able to find the appropriate solutions. And sometimes it has to do with advocating for them, talking to their healthcare provider about what it is that they need. And so that's going to really need that support and involvement from the parent to be able to give that child the support that they need. So yeah, I hope that helped answer the question.
Yeah, no, it does. But I want to follow up with one
Sure.
small piece on that. So, you've talked, when you were talking about sort of gender identity questions that children at different ages experience, you kind of have been differentiating between, is it a phase? Is it right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, when you talk about if these issues emerging, say later in childhood or at puberty and adolescence, et cetera, does that suggest that it's less of a phase and more likely to be sort of something more about the child themselves and and therefore sort of changes the way we might support that or respond to our children?
Sure. So that's a good question. I would think that the later that someone is bringing it up, the more, I guess, like more seriously you need to take it, like the less likely that it is a phase. Because they've had more time to figure out the world. They've had more time to figure out themselves and notice what they feel like and what things that they like and who they want to be. So it's the later that it is, the more kind of sure that person will be about it. And so that's when they'll need to start really talking about it. So if it is kind of a later childhood or adolescence kind of thing, then we really need to be listening to it. But that's another reason that it's important to start the conversations early, because by then we'll know for sure. And so we'll have been kind of keeping an eye on it along the way, so that it's not just like a big surprise at adolescence.
And I would imagine too, then that same child will be more comfortable and feel supported at home to even have those conversations.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let me just ask a couple more though. One person asks, if a child doesn't really know the meaning of LGBTQ, but they believe they identify in that way, do you have any suggestions for how to have a healthy conversation with your child about that?
Okay, so that's a great question. So the genderbread person that I showed, I had a lot of different like swigglies and diagrams on it. And so I talked about the identity and sex and gender expression part. There's another part that I didn't mention that was on the picture, and it was like a little heart right here that was about attraction. And so that's like romantic attraction, sexual attraction, whatever. So that's like sexuality. So when we think about LGBTQ, the LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, queer, those things have to do with that romantic attraction to someone. And those are also a separate thing from all of this gender stuff. So a lot of times we think about them together because maybe they go together, maybe there's like a pattern to that, but they are separate things. So we could have, a boy that likes pink and dresses and flowers who doesn't end up being transgender and doesn't end up being gay, even if that's kind of our guess for that person. They're separate things. So if we have a child that is thinking that they might be one of these things. So the reason that I separated out like L, G, B, and Q from T is the one that's kind of a standalone thing. That's the one that's transgender, and that's the one that's like a gender thing versus all of these LGBTQ other letters that are about sexuality. So those are different things. So if we're thinking about a child that might be in this LGBTQ kind of range, but we're not really sure, but they might be. Again, the answer is going to be to talk about that with them. And so the ways that we can do that, it'll depend on their age and the kinds of experiences that they've had. So if they are maybe thinking about it because, they're 5 or they're 8 or whatever, and they might like someone that is the same gender as them, for example, and they think that it might be like a romantic attraction, like, oh, this is my girlfriend, then that is a different kind of conversation than if you're just talking about it in the abstract, and just like, some people are gay, like it's a different kind of conversation. But you can start it in that kind of broad way. So in the same kind of way that we would say like, well, some boys like pink. It's like some boys like other boys and some girls like other girls. And so it's just like a conversation about like, there is variation in what people like and who people are. There are these different groups of people and they're all okay. Then we can start kind of doing some specific examples. So like there's more TV shows and movies now with examples and representation of people like this. And so we can like watch a movie with a gay couple in it together and be like, hey, so if you notice, like this is a family with 2 dads. And so we just talk about what that means and that that's okay. And kind of give them an example that they can relate to. And then you can kind of use that as like a bridge into, so is that something like what you were talking about with the boy you mentioned at school? Like, do you think that you like that boy in the same way that these dads like each other, or different things like that? And so we kind of try to take it from like it's okay, people are like that. And then we can try to connect it and give them like a concrete thing that they can maybe relate to a little more. And then you can kind of explore that and talk to them about what they mean. So sorry, I hope that was helpful.
It was very, very much. It really was. That's another area I think we could almost have a whole nother webinar on, right? And
right, exactly.
So, yeah, no, I think I appreciate that. I think we should probably wrap here. I'm sorry for folks if we didn't get to all your questions. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise and for answering questions. We will definitely have to have you back and do another one of these and dig a little deeper and do more Q&A. It's been really helpful, really informative, I know, for all of us.
Sure. Thank you so much. And yeah, I could talk for days about all of these different things. So I'm happy if I didn't get a chance to get your questions today, I'm happy to talk to you via email, and I'll be sending out a list of resources to try to help answer some of these questions.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So yes, my sincere thanks to our speaker, Dr. Rachel Cook. And of course, my thanks to all of you for participating in today's webinar hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations. At the ICDFR, we've been providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002. If you'd like to hear more from us, please like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit our YouTube page where recordings of today's webinar and all of our past webinars are available, as well as resources along with them. You can also learn more about the work that we do by visiting the ICDFR page on the CSUSB website, which can be found at csusb.edu/ICDFR. With that, again, my thanks to Rachel, my thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful day and be well.